Hi everybody, I wanted to spend a little bit of time briefly talking about the process of choosing a theoretical model. Um, in week 5, you have a discussion post that asks you to select a theoretical model or lens that you will use to address the problem that you're looking at in your community. And in written assignment 3, you'll be asked to expand on this in more detail. So I did want to spend a little bit of time talking about choosing a theoretical model, particularly because for many of you, if you haven't been doing community organizing work or community practice work, this can feel fairly new and maybe somewhat abstract or overwhelming. I think the best way to think about choosing a theoretical model is that in some ways it does parallel what you do in individual or clinical social work, where as a social worker you have sort of a toolbox full of theories that you can use when you're working individually one-on-one with clients. So, things like solution-focused therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy or dialectical approaches. You have a toolbox full of theories that you can use depending on what the client's needs and presenting situation is. Same thing applies when we're talking about community-based practice. We also have a toolbox full of theories that we can use and that help us inform and design interventions in the community. So let me try to show you a little bit what I mean. So why do we need to have a theory? So a theory helps us to be able to generate some hypotheses about what we think our intervention will accomplish in the community. So in a lot of ways, having a theory works very similarly in community practice to the way that it does in research, for those of you who have taken the research methods courses. When we have a theory, it enables us to have variables, right, that we're looking at in the community. And those could be things, let's see, things like power, systems, community organizations, this whole list here, and this is from the week 4 slides. There are important variables that we're looking at when we're engaging in community practice. And having theories about how these work together, whatever they are, can help us better intervene, better plan interventions, and better be able to measure the effectiveness of our interventions. So very briefly, that's one of the reasons why having a theoretical framework is important. So how do we go about determining a theoretical framework? Well, I mentioned that in community-based practice, we have a toolbox full of theories that we can use to address community issues, and those are listed here. Also, you can refer back to some of the week 3 slides, which talked about conflict theory and symbolic interactionism, and also some systems theory in a bit more detail. Now, in a class this short, it's impossible to go through all of these theories in any depth. But what this slide does, and this is in the week 4 slides, if anyone wants to look there, is it provides you with a list of theories that community practitioners can use and have in their toolbox, and also a description of the lens that theory is providing you with. That's really what these theories are. They're the lens that we're looking at the issue through and the lens that we're planning an intervention through. So for example, perhaps you were working with the homeless community, and perhaps the community problem that you've identified is that you talk to community members, and the members of the homeless community feel that the homeless social services agencies in the area are not providing a necessary service that they need, or there's something lacking that the homeless population would like to see happen. But maybe they feel like their voice is not being heard. So perhaps as a community organizer, you view this issue through an empowerment lens, and in doing so, you plan an intervention that involves helping the homeless individuals in the community to organize themselves in order to advocate for change within the social service provider organizations, so that the services the community feels like they need are provided. And that's a kind of simplistic example, but that's one way that you could apply empowerment theory. And maybe part of your intervention in a case like that would be, that you would facilitate perhaps the development of an advisory council of homeless individuals in the community who would then serve as advocates when working with the social services providers in the community. So that's just a really brief example. Another example, you're going to be watching a film called Amina the Interrupters in week 5, and that film is a documentary that focuses on an organization called Ceasefire that was working in Chicago in an effort to address violence in some of the neighborhoods in Chicago. And I don't think they explicitly note the theoretical framework in the film that program was developed with in mind. However, if I had to guess from this list we have here, I would say that social learning theory was likely the lens that the individuals who started Ceasefire were using to look at the issue of violence. What Ceasefire did was to organize community members, many of whom were former gang members, who then would go into the community and serve as what they called interrupters, who would intervene in instances of arguments or other conflicts in the community in an effort to de-escalate the situation and prevent it from escalating to the point of violence. And what is definitely evident in that to me, and when you hear one of the doctors who was involved in the founding of Ceasefire, when you hear him speak, is he talks about how violence in many ways is sort of a learned behavior, and that if you can intervene in the step before things escalate to that point and change the way someone is thinking, you can potentially prevent violence from occurring. So that would be an example of how something like social learning theory informed an intervention. So for written assignment 5, one place to start might be to look at the community that you are addressing in your papers and the community problem that you identified in your last paper, and to see if you can see how one of these theories might help you to inform interventions to deal with that problem. So that's the first way to think about the discussion post in week 5. And you can think of these theories as sort of a broader lens through which you're looking at an issue, or sort of the overarching lens. Once you've done that, so once you've looked at that list, your next step would be to look at the readings from week 4. Once you've sort of developed the lens through which you're going to look at an issue, you sort of have your overarching sort of theory, but you then need to develop a plan. And there are a number of different models for developing community intervention plans. Most community organizing efforts use something called a logic model, which some of you may have encountered in other classes. But a logic model is basically a blueprint for intervention and action that allows you to look in many ways at what resources are available, and then how you're going to mobilize those to reach your goals. A logic model can take many forms. And in your readings from week 4, each of these sort of provides a different version of a logic model. So another way to approach the discussion post that's required in week 5 is to look at the models used in these different examples, and to select one of those that might best guide your approach to solving the problem that you're looking at in the community you've selected. For example, in this particular, slide that over. This selection was looking at healthy cities and healthy communities, and provides a framework for an inclusive participatory process for improving quality of life and creating a healthy community. Now, you might not be looking at health necessarily, but you could substitute here whatever your community and or issue within that community is. But what this reading provided you with was one version of a logic model that uses sort of a clockwise circle to provide a blueprint or a map for how you would go about intervening. So in this case, you would assemble a diverse and inclusive group, then you would generate a vision, assess assets and resources and barriers, prioritize issues, develop a community-wide strategy, implement the plan, monitor and adjust your efforts, establish new systems to maintain, build on your gains, celebrate benchmarks and successes, and then tackle the next issue if there's new issues to be tackled. So that's one model that you could use. So again, a discussion post 5, the discussion post in week 5, where it asks you to identify a theoretical model or framework. Perhaps you will say, you know what, I really think this healthy cities, healthy communities approach would be great in addressing the needs of the homeless community because, and you'll want to make a case for why you think this type of model that starts with assembling a diverse and inclusive group and goes through all these steps would be important. So that's another way to approach this assignment. Let's see, there are a couple of other examples. Here's another one. This particular reading that you had looked at asset development as a framework. So in this case, it was looking how assets in the community contribute to the healthy development of children and adolescents specifically. In this case, you could substitute looking at the assets that contribute to, the well-being of the homeless community or whatever group you're looking at. So in this model, and this looks a little more confusing than it is, in one column, they're identifying resources in the community. Then they're listing the activities that those resources provide, what the output is potentially from those activities, and then what short-term and long-term outcomes could come from that. So, for example, schools help to establish strong youth-oriented relationships, which gives us an output of family support and positive family communication, caring neighborhoods, a caring school environment, which has a short-term outcome of increased external support for adolescents and a longer-term outcome of increased success and leadership. So again, yours doesn't need to look exactly like this, but this is just another example of a framework that you could use when thinking about providing interventions in the community that you are addressing. And there were a couple of others in the articles as well, so I would encourage you to revisit those. Let's go back here. So again, here's where the articles were in week 4. So that's how you could answer the discussion post in week 5, is to select one of the models from in here. So the last thing I wanted to talk about, as I said, logic models can look very different. I just showed you 2 examples that looked very different from one another. I also wanted to provide you with this general logic model template, which is also available through the University of Kansas Community Toolbox. This is just a general template, and the assignment in week 5 does also, the discussion post in week 5 does also give you the option of coming up with your own framework. So I just wanted to include this as well to give you another way to sort of visualize thinking about theoretical frameworks. You don't have to use this, but if perhaps your issue doesn't quite fit neatly with the other frameworks that you read about, this may be another way to start thinking through how you would approach it. And you can also look in chapter 2, oops, sorry about that, chapter 2 of the University of Kansas, and there are some other examples as well of of different frameworks in addition to the ones that you were provided with in the readings. So to wrap up, for the purposes of the week 5 discussion post, I know I've sort of said a lot in this presentation, but what you really need to hone in on is what is the sociological theory guiding your framework? And that's that list we looked at that included things like conflict theory, empowerment theory, social capital theory. So what is the sociological theory guiding your framework? And then second is, what framework will you use? And those frameworks are the frameworks that include the logic models that you see in the week 4 readings, as well as other examples that are available through the University of Kansas's website if the ones that you are required to read don't seem to work for you. If anyone has any questions about this whatsoever, please feel free to email me. Don't overthink it too much, but I hope this does help. Thanks.